We also want to tuck in a little bit more information about Hurricane Helene and just how horrific this week has been for people down south and in Appalachia. So first, because of the storm itself, of course, but also the aftermath and what could now be a decade-long fight to rebuild, one that has implications really for all of us. We've watched, of course, as the death toll has jumped to 20 and then 50 and then 100, now 200 plus, and we're still counting. But for lots of people, especially in parts of Western Carolina, like the city of Asheville, a beautiful city I know well, a second shock is now setting in. And by the way, this is a big risk, actually, for millions of us, which is why I wanted to talk about it today for a bit. So the risk I'm talking about involves not only the flood, but insurance around the flood insurance, and really the limitations and the lack of flood insurance for so many. So floods are the most expensive type of natural disaster in America, but private insurers generally do not cover damages, not as part of normal home insurance. To fill that gap, Congress has set up a national flood insurance program through FEMA. But guess what? According to Reuters, less than 1 in every 100 homes in those rural, more mountainous counties in western North Carolina had flood coverage. Less than 1%. And that's often because the people living there, they don't realize that they're actually at risk of floods, or that risk appears to be growing. And that's because the federal maps that outline flood potential, those are old, they're outdated. And even worse, they only account for coastal storm surge and river flooding, not the landslides and the flooded valleys of Western Carolina. So what now? And what's the fix here? Not only for this storm, but for the next and for the next and for the next, because this is not over, not by a long shot. Adriana, I understand we have just the guy for these questions.
We absolutely do, Tony. We have Andrew Rumbach, who is a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, who studies household risks from natural disasters. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. I actually have an article and some research that you just released this week titled How North Carolina Can Address Housing Challenges After Hurricane Helene. So you are just the guy to talk to today. Just to give us an overall sense, good morning. What are folks there facing in terms of their ability to rebuild and get into safe housing?
Well, sure. Like you said, it's going to be a really long road for many of these folks. And so right now, they're really focusing on the ground on making sure everyone has somewhere safe to stay. For some folks, that's going to mean staying with friends or family. For other folks, it's going to be in hotel rooms or, long-term rentals. But we call it transitional housing. It's getting folks into places that they can stay until we have a permanent housing solution.
You know, Andrew, can you help people understand why flood insurance is not already part of home insurance? And then also, additionally, why so many people who might be eligible for federal help don't actually opt in? There's a huge gap out there.
Sure, it's a great question. And the history of the flood insurance program, it's a long history. It goes way back to the middle of the 20th century. But, long story short, private insurers were not providing flood insurance, and more people were moving to areas that were experiencing floods. And so U.S. Congress stepped in. They created the National Flood Insurance Program in 1948. And ever since then, that's been the main provider of flood insurance. But like you said, it's always been a challenge because most people, especially those who don't live on the coast, just don't know that their homeowners insurance don't cover floods. Everyone can buy flood insurance, but what we find through the research is that the vast majority of people who are not required to purchase it don't purchase it. And then to your second question, I think there's a lot of different reasons that people don't purchase insurance, and there's really great research on this. For some, it's too expensive. For many people, they don't even know they're at risk. And then especially for these communities that you're talking about that don't see floods very often, they just didn't even think it was a possibility, and so flood insurance is not on their mind.
But Andrew, the definition of very often seems to be changing. I heard someone the other day say, if it can rain at your house, it can flood at your house. Do you think that's the way people should look at this?
Absolutely. Everyone should have flood insurance. It's very affordable, especially for people who live in areas that they don't think it's going to flood. But again, we can talk later about some bigger reforms we need. But for now, insurance is the first line of defense for most people. And so whether you're an owner or a renter, you should purchase flood insurance. You should look at your homeowner's policy and make sure.
Wow. Everyone, Andrew, everyone should have flood insurance, you think?
Absolutely. 100%.
Wow. In your report, you talk about how some of the shortcomings to this flood insurance coverage is the fact that FEMA's flood maps aren't updated enough. Is that the case?
Yes, that's the case. And so we have one of the important parts of the flood insurance program is to create these maps. And what the maps do is tell people, and they tell communities where flood risk is. And many of those maps were made 20 or 30 years ago, and especially in rural areas that haven't had a disaster, they may be quite outdated. And then to the other point that was made earlier, they don't take into account climate change, and they especially don't take into account these heavy precipitation events. And that's exactly what we've seen here with this hurricane, and we've seen all over the country in recent years. And again, it's a reason that everyone should have flood insurance.
All right. Andrew Rumbach, thank you very much. Appreciate you getting up with us.
I got to get some flood insurance.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You've got Hill in the name of your neighborhood, so maybe not. But yeah, it sounds like everybody.
Everybody. That's what he said. Thank you so much, Andrew.